talk tonight about where origins, which is where religion, science, and the law intersect. Disclosures, my home base there is with Creation Study Group with, you see Tom DeRosa here, down in Fort Lauderdale. I appreciate the church being the sponsor here tonight as far as a place to meet, but don't blame them for any of my opinions and or thoughts. And it's just a great privilege to be here. And we have to start out with a joke or two. We have, here's a whale that's got beached, and he says, how are we ever going to evolve if you people keep pushing us back into the ocean? And evolution and creation is very big in popular culture now, and here we see the evolution of Garfield. Well, we trust our teachers, but even back in high school, I thought, that's very odd, this whole evolution thing. I can't imagine, it making sense. But what happens is teachers have an outline that they have to follow, the state standards. So I went to the Florida Science Standards meeting in 2008. I sat beside a fellow who surrounded himself with books. He had his own book castle all around him. And we were listening. And he stood up and testified as a mathematician that evolution was mathematically impossible. And when he sat down, the other folks testified and kept talking about, well, you can see evolution everywhere. It's just, and it's irrefutable, and there's so many science findings. So I leaned over to him and I said, you look pretty smart, and we've both been around the world. What examples do they really have? And we looked at each other. And we said, well, they have Darwin's finches, but at the end of the day, they're still finches. And then also they have these speckled moth story, but even according to the storyline, after the white speckled moth gets eaten, they're still just moths. So it was a very profound revelation for me that even though there was all this discussion, they have absolutely no example of something evolving from simple to complex. Nothing that we can see or observe. Nothing. Also, I got up at that meeting and I said, well, I think that we could teach both. I said, it's so easy, even a caveman could do it. And they looked at me like, well, you're a nice fellow, why don't you sit down now? And that caused me to go home and start studying. And so tonight I hope that you all will profit from all the homework that's going on in the studying about the legal side. But first, before we get too far, there's some people here at home who this is a bit of a new topic, so we'll give it a few moments on the foundation. We'll talk mostly about the legal history, talk a bit about the definition of secular and theistic evolution, and then have some fun at the end. It's a bit difficult to make a legal talk exciting, but we're going to do our best here tonight. Because we ask ourselves, well, who cares? Why is this such a big deal anyway? Well, under the creation model, people are special. We're all one family. There's no inferior races, and marriage is sacred. It actually affirms Christ, and also death is a consequence of the fall. But when you go over to the evolution side, they want us to know that we're all animals. And it's a dog-eat-dog, survival of the fittest world, which is that's a pretty tough way to start your day. Also, without Adam, the first Adam makes Christ unemployed, and when death is actually a helpful thing in the evolutionary model, because especially if somebody jumps off a bridge, well, there you've thinned out the genetic pool, and they look at that as something good. I added a few more things that are more legal-minded. First of all, we have law is very interested in the secular or business or cash flow that has to do with our society. Under the creation side, when we teach creation, it encourages folks, young people who are Christian, to go on and be involved in science. And that helps to fortify our science population, people who can help our society through science. Economically, though, I would have to say evolution is irrelevant because most manufacturers don't have 1 million years to make something. Also, the evolutionists will try to tell us that, hey, you have to believe this because it's an international thing. We have to be accepted internationally. And as it turns out, a lot of the countries don't believe in evolution, and in some countries it's actually illegal. Science-wise, again, by teaching creation, there has to be a secular purpose. Well, it encourages critical thinking, and it's academically honest. Teaching the controversy, the things that don't necessarily agree with evolution. Since we've started teaching evolution according to the law in school, the United States has actually had less Nobel Prizes. That's something, Jonathan Sephardi was here last week, and that's something he points out. Lastly, on nature, as we look around us, as a creationist, we see that we can see the hand of God, His signature in the complexity and beauty, whereas in the evolutionary view, it changes our perspective to more of a utilitarian, materialistic view, such as if we look at a tree, we think, oh, well, I could cut it down, I could make some furniture, I could make some firewood. But as a creationist, we don't have to do anything. We could just look at the tree and enjoy the beauty. Well, as it turns out, we learned last time that Pastor Phillips was a major in tank warfare. And when I was looking for pictures of tanks, I didn't know they could actually go become airborne. And but I do know about tank warfare. If you want to attack a tank as an infantry person, like creationists attacking evolution, you can take a few shots at the tank and then you should run and hide. And then the tank will pursue you. And then take a few more shots and then run and hide. You retreat. But eventually, the two become decisively engaged, meaning somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. And in our court system, it tends to be an adversarial system where somebody wins, somebody loses. So again, going back to some basics, and first of all, I've actually got up to almost 60 reasons why evolution is false, but one of my favorites is about, we've just discovered the human genome has 6 billion nucleotides. They've compared that to chimpanzee, which is supposedly our best bet for a relative. There's 2 billion pieces difference in the DNA. And that means, when you look at that, it's very hard to imagine that natural selection could make that gap, that 2 billion DNA pieces, or not DNA, but nucleotides in the DNA. This is a picture of a monkey down in Panama. Took last year, and from the Creation Museum. Huge differences in the DNA. Also, this cartoon illustrates, we see the lady saying to Adam, "Where have you been?" Well, of course, he had to slowly evolve. But when we look at National Geographic, they tell us there's 1.7 million creatures. Well, we have to have often we have to have male and female to have reproduction. So how could you have 1.7 million? Actually, both genders, you're up to 3.4 million. It's virtually impossible for the genders to evolve in such a way to reproduce in time. Also, I have a lot of fun back home talking to our infectious disease doctors. All of them say that bacteria don't evolve into more complex things. So if even the simplest of creatures don't really evolve, once again, they have nothing. They have no examples of what they claim. Well, we've taken 3 quick shots at evolution. Let's go on and see what happens. Religion, according to the 1890 case, it's actually a case about polygamy. But they talked a lot about religion, and it has to do with where we come from, who made us, and in that case, what do we owe that Creator? And so, is evolution religious? Well, if it is, then what religion is that? Well, let's back up a second. Does evolution think there's a Creator? by and by, no, it's a creatorless process. So in that case, you don't owe the Creator anything. And that's what we're teaching in our schools. I've been thinking about this more lately too. I think it also fits a deist model. And this first got started legally in 1925 with the Scopes monkey trial. In Dayton, Tennessee, there was a fella, and his name was John Scopes. And it's a small town in Tennessee, and they thought, well, it's kind of slow here. Let's stir it up a little bit. Let's have some action. We can have a lot of people come to our town and spend a lot of money if we can just find something to do. They said, well, let's go to trial. Let's challenge the recent law that says you can't teach evolution. And John Scopes was a substitute teacher, and they said, did you teach evolution? He says, I don't really remember if I did or not. But at trial, he incriminated himself. He says, yes, I taught evolution, and that set the whole conflict in motion. We learned two things in that trial. One, we have Clarence Darrow versus William Jennings Bryan. And people came from all over the world to be there, from as far away as Europe. They really wanted to know. People are very, very curious. Where did we really come from? There were so many people that they were afraid the courthouse would collapse. So they took the court outside under a big tree. And then they said, well, now who's going to go first? Evolution or creation? William Jennings Bryan, who hadn't tried a case in 36 years, said, well, I'll go first. I'll defend creation. And that was our first mistake. And we keep making that mistake over and over and over again. Because as long as we're defending ourselves, that allows evolution to get a pass card and go free. So he stood and he defended the best he could all day long creation. And at the end of the day, the judge says, none of this really matters. The law says you can't teach evolution. And he asked, John Scopes, did you teach evolution? He says, yes. He says, okay, you're guilty. That'll be $100. Evolution never came under question in that trial. And so what I learned from that trial, and that's supposed to be 1925, people really want to know. People are very, very curious. It's important to us. But secondly, if we're ever going to win, we have to quit defending, being on the defense. We have to be on the offense and question evolution. As time went on, there was a case in Arkansas, Epperson versus Arkansas. And they said, well, this whole idea of having laws where you can't teach evolution, we don't like that. Something popped up there. We think that you should be able to teach evolution because it's just teaching stuff, and students, they should know about this. And but it doesn't say what class the evolution should be taught in. And one of my legal approaches is I think it should be taught in comparative religion class. But the trend is, I'll tell you what the actual trend is a little bit later here, but it's not really trending in that direction. And so that allowed the camel's nose in the tent. And somebody asked somebody the other day, do you know what that means, the camel's nose in the tent? They said, no. They said, well, once he gets his nose in, he'd like to get his whole self in. And this is a camel in Israel we got to take a ride on a while back. Then came the lemon test. And they said, well, before government gets tangled up, and this is incredibly important legal precedent, they said, number one, before government gets tangled up in religion, it has to have a secular purpose. It has to have something to do with business, money. And it can't advance or inhibit religion. So you can't encourage it or discourage it. And most of all, just we're not, as a government, to get tangled up excessively in religion. It's called the lemon test. And then we have, not long after that, in Edwards versus Aguilar, the very famous case, 1987, they said, well, you want to teach both. You want to teach creation and evolution. Well, creation has to do with God, so that's religious, and we can't use government money to encourage theistic Judeo-Christian thinking, and the government just can't get tangled up in that. So you can't teach creation in school, and that started in 1987, according to the Supreme Court. And then, again, the camel got his nose in the tent. Now the whole camel's gotten in. What was odd about this, when you look at the case, there was no science experts. Again, they applied the Lemon test. Again, they never questioned Darwinism. And then you win some and you help me out? You win some and you lose some, that's right. Well, this is a list of the ones we've lost. In most of them, they knew they weren't comfortable with not being able to teach creation. So they wanted to teach creation. And they knew there was something wrong with evolution, but they continued to call it humanism, secular humanism. And even though the court has said that is a religion, in these cases they said, well, that's kind of fuzzy. It's more of a philosophy. Evolution is not a religion, and you guys are trying to break the law because you want to teach creation. We just told you can't do that. And we learned some lessons also in Wright versus the Houston schools. The dear lady tried to get 3 different lawyers to help her, and it just never worked out. She went to court pro se, which means she represented herself. And I call that going to a gunfight with a knife. And she didn't do very well. And I wanted to mention, especially for some of our folks who are high school teachers, this case, Pelosi said, I'm a Christian, I believe God created, and you're asking me to violate my religious freedoms, you're asking me to not have freedom of speech, and I think it's wrong that you're making me teach evolution, which is a secular humanist thinking. And the court said, well, Teacher Pelosi, when you're at school, you're an agent of the state. And when you're an agent of the state, that means that you have to not teach your personal views, but teach what you're getting paid to teach. You have to follow the outline, which is evolution. And again, they said, well, evolution is secular humanism. Well, they didn't really buy that, and he didn't really do a very good job of characterizing evolution, but he did a good enough job that when at the end of the trial, they didn't make him pay for the school board's legal fees. But through all of these, we learn several things, which will be in the next slide. Lastly, Institute of Creation Research wanted to teach creation and get science credit for that. There in Texas, the head of the Texas Education School Board, he says, no, you guys, it's not science, but we'll let you get education credit. So what can we learn from the losses? Well, first, you have to have a lawyer. It's really nice if he's pro bono, because that means, it doesn't mean he's working for free. That means when he wins, the other side has to pay him. It's helpful to have a little bit of jingle, a little bit of war chest. Doesn't necessarily cost that much if your lawyer's pro bono. You have to have expert PhD witnesses. You can't just show up in court and say, well, here I am, and this is the way I feel. No, you have to have some experts. At the same time, you have to obey the Supreme Court decision, which is you can't teach creation because it's religious. But most of all of these failed to take the time to show that evolution is religious and it's atheist or deist because it requires a lot of leaps of faith. Earlier we said 3.4 million leaps of faith, magical thinking. In my sign up there, it shows those arrows, I call those evolution arrows, leaps of faith. Well, is atheism really religion? A lot of people say it's not. Well, the court says it is, and that's another thing that's changed over time. They've solidified the idea that yes, it is. In fact, atheism is religion in nature, a parallel position to religion. So we've actually won a few times, though, and going back to our tank metaphor, this is a Jordanian tank, and here's Jordan in the background, and it got rocketed right there, and yep, you can see that, and that was in our tour of Israel. So we've actually won, and part of the problem is you'll hear a lot of the full-time creationists say, oh, we keep losing, we've never won, you know, we've done terrible all along. Well, that's not really true. Let's look. Here we go. Legislatively, 4 states allow creation facts. In Kentucky, if a student answers and consistently answers along the same lines, they get credit when it comes to origins questions. In Louisiana, it's become law. In Tennessee also, and Wisconsin. Now, how do they do that? Well, by and large, they don't stand up and say, class, we want to teach you creation. We want to teach you the facts that may go against evolution. We want to teach you all the facts and let you make some critical decision making. And there's plenty of facts. In the packet we handed out tonight, it's a kind of a working list I'm working on. It has almost 60 different facts we can teach. Also, there was a really great case in Georgia. Cobb County is the largest school board district in Georgia, and they would get the science books and tear out all the pages on evolution, which I would have loved to help do that. But then the book got to be so filled with evolution that if they tore the pages out, it would tear up the whole backing of the book. So they said, we'll put on a sticker. The sticker will say, this book contains evolution. It's it's a theory, it's not a fact. Read with cautions. I'm paraphrasing. And actually, Alabama does have those stickers. Well, Jeffrey Selman, who's an atheist, he said, well, I don't like that. That's a religious sticker. And he took him to court. In the first round, Jeffrey Selman, the atheist, won. The Cobb County School Board appealed it, and in the appeals court, the judge says, well, those stickers are factual. They're not saying anything religious, and it is just a theory, and it's okay. Well, the next step would have been to go clear to the Supreme Court, and Cobb County evidently was footing this bill with the lawyers, and they said, well, let's just call it a day, and they agreed to take the stickers off. So that's why I call that one a stalemate. 2006, the Kansas Board of Education had hearings. They wanted to teach creation. The evolutionists boycotted the hearings and stayed out in the lobby and handed out brochures. They did real well, and some of these people are still active in a case I'm going to tell you about in a second. Something happened there. And but what happened is the school board was replaced. A lot of the folks got voted out, and so that got reversed. Out in California, there was a student was sitting in class, and the student said, the teacher said, well, you know, creation is just a religious, nutty idea. It's religious fanatics. Well, he took the teacher to task and took him to court, and the court says, well, you know, that's a very biased, very prejudiced thing to say, and you're actually inhibiting a certain religion by using your government position to beat down on it. You at least need to apologize. So they made him apologize. The Florida Science Standards, I was a part of that. It was a big battle over this word, theory, and we managed to keep the word theory in front of evolution. Both sides claimed a victory. And oddly enough, every 5 years, the new science standards are supposed to review and public input. And in 2003, I was all ready, and they just had online submissions. So whether that's really right or not, we'll have to look into. In New Mexico, just this year, I was just out there actually, the Natural History Museum in Albuquerque. They were going to have a Darwin's Day, and the Freedom From Religion Foundation, largest atheist organization in the nation, said, well, we're going to celebrate Darwin in 150 years. So the creationists were very clever. They said, well, we would like a booth too. It's your celebration. And the atheist folks says, no, you can't do that. And the creationist says, well, you can't do it either then, can you? Because you're using a government-funded place for your religious atheist views. So they actually won again. Also, the case I'm just about ready to tell you about has caused the states, only 12 of the states, to adopt the next generation science standards. All the rest of the states are hovering and waiting to see what happens with this next, it's not this next one, but I'll tell you about in a second. Finally, let's go back to Kitzmiller versus Dover. A lot of folks are interested in that. Quick story about this right here. We had a little creation activity at our church, and I asked this little boy, I said, do you think that dinosaurs turned into birds? And he said, well, mister, see how that dinosaur's running? I said, yeah. He said, well, let me show you. He said, I tried that. And right then he ran through the church as fast as he could, flapping his arms, came back, and he said, see, mister, I couldn't fly. It doesn't work. And I thought, even a little boy can figure this one out. But at this case, they had a fellow named Kevin Padian, and he brought Archaeopteryx, this fossil, and told the court, Judge Jones, that see how evolution's real. There was a big battle between, it's not Hugh Miller, it's actually Ken Miller, who's a part of the Miller and Levine textbook. And they had a big battle over the flagellar motor until finally the judge couldn't hardly stand another word about the flagellar motor. But of course, the case was actually about intelligent design rather than creation. Some of the school board members wanted that taught. The biology teachers wouldn't teach it. So they had one of the administrators go in and say, he was going to read it to them and say, well, you know, evolution is just a theory and we want you to know about this other idea. So a big battle lit up. And when you boil it down, creation versus evolution, evolution believes that nature assembled itself, whereas we think it had to have a designer. One of the things I want to talk about, the reason I'm here at a creation study group tonight, is that right before this trial, we had 8 science experts all lined up. And just a few days before trial, when it was too late to find anybody else, according to law even, 3 of our guys backed out, walked away. Now they evidently had some legal thought or something on their mind, but that left us 5 science experts. Halfway through the trial, when it was our turn to defend creation, 2 more walked out. Now, I don't know about you, but when you play baseball or some sport, when you walk off the field right at game time, I mean, that's just incredulous. That left only 3 people to even defend in any way, shape, or form creation. There was a fellow named Dr. Michael Behe, who wrote Darwin's Black Box. There was another fellow named Scott Minich, who was an associate professor who had done a study on the flagellar motor, that he showed that Minich showed that if you cause a mutation in any one of the 35 parts of the flagellar motor, it wouldn't work. So Michael Behe took a beating one-on-one with all the lawyers on the other team. At one moment, they asked him, well, in your book, you say the immune system could never evolve. Is that right? He said, yes, that's right. They brought out a huge stack of articles about the evolution of the immune system and laid it right in front of him saying, well, there, all these articles say it can evolve. And that's a tactic called avalanche, where you just dump a bunch of stuff on somebody all at once. But he stood up to the fight, and that's why I like to say he was a one-man army. So let's see what one man could do. Well, one creation PhD scientist. Well, the judge did say that intelligent design is really creation. You can't divorce the two, although we know there's differences. And he said, you know, we can't teach creation, you know that. And so what he did say is evolution may be false or simply dogma, but it's not religious. And that science is based on methodologic naturalism. So this is very important. This slide is one of the most important because the law, the court is willing to say that evolution is false. It's willing to say that it might just be something if we repeat it over and over again, people will believe it. And when they say it's not religious, that's a problem. No one up until this time had taken the time to show how evolution is atheist. And the whole problem, part of the big problem is this big old word, methodologic naturalism, means they want a natural explanation. But sometimes the answer is no, God really did do it. And so when they talk about creation is not science, they're using a more narrow definition of science, whereas we just look at all the science findings and see where it points us. So the case was lost, but we did learn a lot. And in the next go-round is Cope versus Kansas Board of Education. There's a little brochure there in her packet tonight. And we want to give Maria at Creation Studies Institute credit for this incredible picture. And COPE stands for Citizens for Objective Public Education. And they say, you know what, when you talk about origins, that is religious. Where we come from is a religious question. When you put things in a methodologic naturalism, right away you're not allowed to give the answer how God did something. Which if you're not allowed to do that, then you're forced to give an atheist answer when you use methodologic naturalism. And their request at the end of the day is that just be objective. Teach the controversy. Let's look at what they have. They have a team of lawyers. Interestingly enough, tonight's not about asking for money. I actually offered to send these folks a lot of money. And they said, no, keep it. I was pretty amazed. They said, no, you keep it. They said, well, right now it's just working its way through the court. They said, when the time comes when it has to go to trial, then send us money. I said, okay. One reason I'm here tonight and one reason Creation Study Group is so incredible, I want to stop right here. Number one, there's not a boatload of creation PhDs. And number two, when you call some of the, not some, all of the full-time creation groups, and I won't name any names tonight, they're quick to tell you we're not going to be involved. And in fact, we think they have a lot of negatives, but they're not going to help. So all those PhDs are knocked out. Then you have to ask for what about PhDs who are teaching right now in university? Well, if they're in a secular university, they may lose their job. So now the field's narrowed down more and more. You may find some PhDs who are teaching at Christian colleges or who are retired. But in the retired ones, they have to be healthy enough to engage. and to travel to the trial. Or maybe they could do it by video, but nevertheless, they have to be strong enough to be involved. And after all that, you have to have folks who are just willing and brave enough to step forward. I have found here at the Creation Study Group that you all have the guts and the degrees and the flexibility, and I really appreciate that tonight. Again, we're not trying to break the law. We're not asking to teach creation. We're asking to teach the science facts, even if the facts don't support evolution. And finally, in this case, they've taken the time to develop, and you can go on the website and read it. It's pretty long and lengthy in legalese, but show that evolution is religious. Right now, so now we're talking about today. Where are we today? We started back in 1925. We're really motoring. They just spent a year in federal court, and Judge Crabtree said that, he said, we know that evolution is atheist. We know you don't like it, but there's no financial or tangible loss. So because you have no damages, we're going to dismiss the case. Well, he's a liberal judge, so we knew he would do that. Right now, then, it gets appealed to the federal appeals court, where we have evidently the five most conservative judges in the nation. They're in Kansas Federal Appeals Court. We're hoping they decide in our favor sometime later this year or early next year. Finally, either way, both sides are ready to take it to the Supreme Court and have the know-how. This is Dr. Latimer, who's president of COPE, and he was at, we were just talking about the Creation Research Society's meeting last summer. He was there and presented. And so that is the legal part. I want to talk about a few more legal dynamics. One is secular scientists versus creation scientists. It happened to me again this week. I'm reading Acts and Facts, and throughout the creation literature, which I read most every day, they always call the other side secular scientists. Well, and that makes us creation scientists. And so my point is we need to avoid this common mistake. Well, why is that? Well, let's look at the word secular. Well, according to Black's Law Dictionary, secular means it's not religious, has to do with the affairs of the present world. And I like to say then it has to do with business and money. And the big problem with using the word secular is the lemon test. Now, creation scientists, we immediately run into trouble down here because, yes, it has something to do with God and religion, and it gets the state tangled up. So we know that ours is religious. But when we call theirs secular, well, right here it says, oh, secular scientists, that's good. They must be good because they're secular. So the government wants to help secular things. And, they're not religious because they're secular, so they're not hurting or helping anybody. So that's okay. And because they're secular, then we're not getting tangled up in religion. So we shoot ourselves in the foot when we call them secular scientists. In fact, we kind of need to think of it a bit different. We need to think of ourselves, and don't fall out of your seat, we need to think of ourselves as secular scientists. We make, secular meaning business and money, we make money, a living, pay for our houses, cars, and everything by helping students or being in the industry. We're secular scientists also. We use our science knowledge to make a living and money. So what should we do? Well, I think we need to be more specific. Not just call people names, but be more specific. One that works really well when I'm talking with people is I say creatorless atheist scientist. Folks pick up real quick on the creatorless, which leads into atheist and then scientist. Could call them just atheist scientists. Could call them Fadami, fairy dust in millions of years, mnemonic. Or you could call them just atheist faith scientist, or I like doctrine of death scientist. But we need to change our vocabulary. We need to write to our authors, let them know about the Lemon Law, let them know how we're giving evolutionists a free pass when we call them secular and not specify. We could call them atheist secular scientists. And lastly, one of the things that kind of muddies things up in the law is your theistic evolution. Folks who want to see it through the God and evolution at the same time. And one of my patients dropped this off the other day. Let me just reiterate, I'm not a lawyer. I am a family doctor, but you have to be aware of the law when you're a family doctor and have lawyer billboards hanging outside your building every day. But anyway, the patient gave me, said, God throws creationists a curve, says, let there be evolution. It's Dr. William Povine, who's at Cornell, he says, well, you know, evolution makes atheists out of people. One can have a religious view that is compatible with evolution only if the religious view is indistinguishable from atheism, creatorless atheist thinking. So the mechanisms are totally separate. Natural selection is the mechanism here. The mechanism here is a creator actually puts things together. Most of all, I like to talk about the fallacy of the mean. And the focus of this slide is the fire. And if you and I are sitting here by the fire, and I say, well, you know, I think fire's cold. It is cold. And you say, well, fire's hot. I'm pretty sure it's hot. But we say, well, let's meet in the middle. Fire's lukewarm. That's right. And so we all stick our hand in the fire. We're going to get burnt because it really is hot. And so when we start introducing evolutionary atheist thinking into our worldview, we're going to bring along all that baggage that we mentioned earlier. The theistic evolutionist is uncomfortable with saying, well, I think evolution did the whole thing, but it is not comfortable with God did it in 7 days. That's asking too much. So on both ends they're saying that's asking too much. So that's why they want to come towards the middle and mix the both up. So now the fun part, and we're doing pretty good on time it looks like. So creation, working in creation is fun also. We had a great conference at our church last year. You get to go places like the Creation Studies Institute, Discovery Museum in Fort Lauderdale. You get to meet people like Ken Ham, and this is Mark Malloy, his helper in the background. It's state of the art. It's incredible state of the art. This is Tom DeRuza at his. Just kind of goof around, have fun once in a while. It's outdoor fun too. Last summer we went to Utah and 25 miles out in the middle of nowhere in a pile of shale and dug, and about every 15 minutes, each of us would find some trilobites. And it was just beautiful being out in the hills of Utah. It was just an incredible experience. There was a fellow out there named Gene, had his little trailer, he stayed there and he talked real slow because when you're out there, not many people come out. You try to let your conversation stretch out. And here's in Peace River in Florida, we get to go dredging for fossils. Here's some of the findings we find there. Get to go to some great national treasures, like the Carnegie Museum there in Pittsburgh. Lastly, we have some gift bags for folks tonight, some beautiful gift bags made by a very special friend of mine in exchange for helping her go to the Philippines to help at an orphanage. And some of those have the peacock feathers. Peacock feathers, you know, used to give Charles Darwin a headache, would trigger a headache. And in family practice, we learn about headache, migraine triggers. Well, this triggered his because he saw an artist's touch, a creator's touch. And that didn't match what he was talking about. So they've actually done experiments. Well, let's test that. They've tested it. They've, in Japan, Dr. Mariko Takahashi observed peacocks and peahens mate almost 200 times. measured the feathers, how many feathers, how long they were, and found out the peahens, they don't care at all about the peacock's beautiful feathers. Again, pointing back to, it's just there and it's beautiful. It's something that God made beautiful. Just creation brings out the best in us all. Lastly, some of the professional folks who work in creation, they say, you know, this whole creation thing is a grassroots. It's a grassroots movement. Don't think about legal or you know, lawmakers and all that. It's grassroots. Well, my problem is we're allowing the other side to have the lawnmower. So we need to get a hold of the lawnmower if we're ever going to come out ahead. And that's why I'm advocating working on things from a legal side.